Hey guys, welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. As always, I am your host, Alex, and I wanted to talk about the Justin Herbert contract this week and sort of the, impending news on it whenever it does come, but, more so team building, which I think is really important to talk about, and I'll talk about what I mean by that exactly in this video. But yeah, let's just jump right into it. So I do have Herbert's eventual contract extension and what it means for the Chargers. So first thing are the priors here, right? We do have the guys that have gotten paid, both this offseason specifically and the guys that could get paid, right? Jalen Hurts getting 5 years, $255 million with $179 million guaranteed. Lamar Jackson, 5 years, $260 with $185 guaranteed. Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, we don't know yet. They're, going to get paid, I presume, at some point this offseason, but I would guess both of them will. And then Patrick Mahomes, right? The nugget that is out there of information that we do know about him is that his deal could get reworked at some point to bump his salary back up to being in the top 5, top 3 quarterbacks getting paid, right? So it is this kind of race to see, again, who gets paid first, right? As it usually is with the quarterbacks. Nothing necessarily new there in terms of information, but it lays the foundation for what we are going to talk about. In terms of asking when the deal is going to get done, the media's done a really good job of that, despite Tom Telesco not saying anything. So maybe if we ask, 4, 5, 6 more times, then we'll finally get an answer. Being a sarcastic asshole, but I think that we should ask different questions to Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley instead of when Justin Herbert going to get paid, because he's not going to tell us. But if you do want a timeline on when I do think Justin Herbert will get paid, I do think you can look towards training camp as, a relative date. You have some of the recent Chargers contract extensions that have happened. Joey Bosa getting paid on July 28th, 2020. Derwin James on about August last year. Keenan Allen, September 5th of 2020, right? So you kind of have this ball game that, when it comes time, when push comes to shove for the Chargers to pay a guy prior to the season starting, they'll do it, right? We've also seen this with some of the rookie contracts even the Chargers have signed with guys like Rashawn Slater and Justin Herbert, who were kind of like in weird situations with their contracts, or just their agents were negotiating, and they were some of the last guys to sign. When it came to training camp, those guys both signed and were both, in camp when it mattered, right? So, I think ultimately the Justin Herbert deal is going to get done around August. Now, does that get done before the Joe Burrow deal? Does that get done before Patrick Mahomes gets reworked, right? These are all questions that will affect ultimately what the numbers are of that Herbert deal, both in, full contract value and the guarantees. So this article came from Lindsay Theory of ESPN this week and talked about, the article title was "The Tricky Business of Building Winning Rosters Around Franchise Quarterbacks," right? Which is to say, once you got the guy and, you're eventually going to have to pay the guy, how do you kind of build the roster before and after having to pay them, given the rookie contract window that does exist since the 2011 CBA, right? And this is something I think the Chargers have toiled with for a couple of years now, but there's really only a year left on Justin Herbert's rookie deal, and then his 5th-year option, which will, kick up to about 11% of the cap, as we'll get to a little bit later. But, certainly the business of Justin Herbert being the starting quarterback will make other aspects of the machine a little bit different in terms of how they look, right? So Tom Telesco sort of talked about this in the past. I think at his postseason press conference in 2021, he talked about, Justin Herbert's rookie contract window, right? He said it doesn't matter to me if the quarterback is on a rookie deal or the Aaron Rodgers deal. And, at the time before he gave quotes for this article, he said he, essentially cited being in, Indianapolis with Peyton Manning, as he does quite often. And basically was like, look, this is, this is just how business goes, right? So we're, if you're going to have to pay a quarterback money, we know how business has to get done. And so he talked about the binder that he has from Bill Polian and Peyton Manning. And as quoted in this article, some of it doesn't apply anymore, but there's still some things that I've written down that I've learned that, this is definitely going to apply in terms of paying Justin Herbert, right? So Tom Telesco has an idea of what he wants to do when it comes to, paying Justin Herbert based on his experience in Indianapolis and how you construct the rest of the team around him. At least that's what he says. And the rookie contract window, I guess, we do kind of talk about it as like we have to maximize, we have to win the Super Bowl during Justin Herbert's rookie window. Not necessarily true, right? It is commonly talked about in the NFL, as Lindsay Theory says here, that the best time to win a Super Bowl is when you have a QB on a rookie deal. However, only 3 teams have won a title with a quarterback on a rookie deal since the 2011 wage scale went into effect. So, it's not necessarily a guarantee of success. And ultimately, look, some of the old quarterbacks that, are still around are going to beat out the rookies, right? In terms of the top 5 guys in the league, as we've seen with Brady and Mahomes over the years. And Mahomes winning, his first Super Bowl off of his rookie contract. Brady, we'll talk about him in just a second here because, right, on the other hand, even though you don't have to win on your rookie contract, right, the advantage of having a guy like Brady who took less money is also an advantage, right, because you're paying him something other than the max, right? And as Theory says in our article, each signed what some have labeled team-friendly contracts. Brady's deal equated to less money, and Mahomes agreed to that big $450 million deal over a decade, which spread the extension around in order for the Chiefs to have, a little bit more salary cap space to work with over time, right? So at the time, it was, this huge contract, but look down 2-3 years down the road, probably not, right? Which is why Mahomes decided the deal will probably look to kind of rework that deal, as has been reported, but probably still keep it team friendly enough for the Chiefs, right? So no, you don't have to win with your quarterback on a rookie deal. The Chargers don't have to win the Super Bowl with Justin Herbert having $8 million on the cap sheet, so to speak. But obviously how they do business and how they are going to push this thing going forward is going to change if he's making $50 million, right? Like that's just kind of obvious. Or, right, not that I think this will happen with Justin Herbert. The other thing is if you are not going to, have a quarterback on a rookie contract, then you do what Brady and Mahomes have done and take less money to kind of build the team, around it. Not saying that Justin Herbert should do that. Not saying Justin Herbert has to do that because I think he should personally get as much money as he wants. That's just what the price is for franchise quarterbacks these days. But this is, proven to be a bit of a loophole in current NFL dynamics. If you have Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers and all these guys who were making max money back in the day, yeah, it helped that Brady was in New England taking less, right? And that was something he voluntarily did. Also did the same thing in Tampa, obviously, when a lot of quarterbacks are making 40 plus million. I believe Brady signed in Tampa for like 25 a year. So yeah, if you in theory in that example have an extra 10 or 15 million to spend, then yeah, it's going to change, how you kind of do business over time. So that gets us to, this chart I've constructed here, I guess, of the last 12 Super Bowl winners. And, as Theory said, only 3 quarterbacks who are on a rookie contract have won the Super Bowl. That being said, I will issue an addendum to that statement because the 2017 Eagles, who won in 2018, didn't technically win with a rookie quarterback, with Nick Foles being the backup, but the team was constructed around a Carson Wentz who was on a rookie deal. So really, in my opinion, that's 4 quarterbacks who have won a Super Bowl, or 4 teams that have won a Super Bowl around a rookie contract quarterback. And of course, the backup in Nick Foles was making backup quarterback money. So yeah, I mean, like, again, that's just more evidence that, yeah, the rookie contract window is a real thing. I don't think you can just push it away and just be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter where he's making Aaron Rodgers money or he's making Justin Herbert rookie contract money. Yeah, it does matter in terms of how you're building the rest of the team, dude. But, as stated here, right, you really look into some of these last Super Bowl champions who were making, less than max money, so to speak. And I really can only come up with, I guess, the Packers, the Giants, and the Rams, right? Every other team you can look at on this chart who won the Super Bowl with a quarterback who was making less money. We have the Baltimore Ravens in 2013, who obviously won with a rookie contract, Joe Flacco, and then he got paid and, eventually kind of deteriorated, right? Seattle Seahawks, that's Russell Wilson, right, on a rookie contract. New England Patriots, Brady taking less. Broncos, that's probably the other example, again, of like a rookie, of a max quarterback, making the money that he did, right? And winning the Super Bowl still. Patriots, we talked about Brady. Eagles, we talked about kind of the Wentz-Foles dynamic there and building a contract or building a team around a rookie contract. The Patriots, again, The Chiefs on Mahomes' rookie deal. Then you have the Bucks, who, won with, again, Brady taking less. The Rams are probably the third or fourth team on here that had a quarterback that was making, big money, I guess. But Stafford's contract by the time he was now with the Rams was kind of old, and then he re-signed and upped his deal after the Super Bowl. And then the Chiefs winning on Mahomes' second contract here. So, yeah, you can kind of make the arguments in cases as you do and say, oh, well, what if the other team won the Super Bowl, or the runner-ups won the Super Bowl? Then what would the stats look like? But, there's kind of no ifs in football, right? These were the results. So, yeah, I mean, as you can see just from that graph that I illustrated of the most recent Super Bowl champions, or just the, the results, right? You do have basically 11, or I would say 10 or 11 of the last 12 champions. I guess you could say 9 based on what we counted off, that had either rookie contracts or were specifically taking less to help the team or agreed to some contract that helped the team over time, right? And so as Theory writes here, determining whether a quarterback is capable of leading a team to a Super Bowl is the first hurdle. The next is ensuring that he has enough talent surrounding him to get there. As Pete Carroll says, it really is a factor. It's a very real situation. The dynamics of your structure of your roster shifts, right? You really have to be creative, and you really have to be fortunate in mixing the makeup of your roster to make it work. So that brings us to the Chargers-Herbert discussion. After all this time, I do want to talk about this specifically because this is really the last year the Chargers have a cheap Justin Herbert. And I would argue they do in 2024 as well. Even when he's on his fifth-year option, he'll be making about $29.5 million. That'll still contribute to 11% of the cap, 11.5 as it's currently listed on Over the Cap, based, barring what next year's cap value ends up being, it'll be around there. But yeah, so obviously this is kind of the last year of cheap Justin Herbert, and then next year will be the last official year before Herbert is making a $50+ million, hit against the cap, right? That's just the reality. And as I put on the screen here, right, you talk about the total cap liabilities that do exist for the Chargers, right? They're about $60 million over the cap next year. They haven't done anything to necessarily circumvent this yet, and there will be some things that they do. But again, part of the benefit of this Herbert rookie contract window is that the Chargers were able to keep this, 2018, 2019 core of Chargers players together, right? When we think about Derwin James, when we think about Joey Bosa, when we think about Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, they got the chance to add Khalil Mack to that. Austin Eckler, right? You can kind of go throughout the list. Derwin James, who obviously signed a big extension, right? So they were sort of able to keep that nucleus together because partially Herbert was on his rookie deal and Phillip Rivers went out the door, right? So that opened up a lot of money for the Chargers as the salary cap was increasing, which allowed them to kind of keep that group together. Next year is when it starts to get hard because Herbert now will make $20 million more, and they restructured those contracts that we talked about this year in terms of the 4 being Keenan, Joey, Mike, and Khalil Mack, right? So those 2 of those 4 guys probably won't be here next year in an effort to bring down this big number in red over here when we talk about $60 million over the cap. So there's going to have to be some finagling to get the Chargers back to cap compliancy, which will happen next year and will result in some sacrifices being made, right? So that kind of will only expand, obviously, as Justin Herbert makes more money. And specifically, not that you're going to necessarily have to restructure a lot of guys when Herbert is making a lot of money. You probably will down the road. But more specifically, what you're going to have to do is just completely restructure and reboot this team. That doesn't mean rebuild for what it's worth, right? Obviously, the Chargers still have a decent portion of their roster on rookie contracts. But it does mean that, eventually you're going to be kind of in the post-Joey Bosa era. Eventually you're going to be in the post-Mike Williams era. And that could come, as soon as next year, depending on how these things play out. And then the question is, how do you kind of replace those top-line starters now that you can't really be active players in free agency anymore, right? So that is kind of where the Chargers have made their bread and butter, as we've seen in the previous years of Herbert on the rookie deal, right? They signed J.C. Jackson to huge money. We saw them give the contract extensions that they gave to Keenan and Bosa, obviously, and Derwin. Then they, go out and make a big trade for Khalil Mack and inherit, $25 million cap hits, et cetera, right? So it's like now that you can't really be that like freewheeling and dealing team in this post Justin Herbert getting paid era that we're eventually going to be in, how do you then kind of build a team around them? And this is something that I talked about in terms of the Chargers getting better in the margins in my video where I talked about the Eagles-Chiefs Super Bowl. And I talked about what both of those teams have done to get to the Super Bowl and what the Chargers can learn from both of those teams. And I have pictured here the Chiefs 2021 class, the Chiefs 2022 class, and the Chargers classes from both of those years. And I think what you see is that the Chargers classes are pretty top-heavy, right? Like, yeah, they'll nail the first round. They got Zion Johnson. They got Slater. They got Santi Samuel Jr. and Palmer. Aside from that, you know, there's not a player who's really making active contributions from the 2021 class. Trey McKitty, you know, Chris Rumpf, Brendan Hymas, Nick Neiman makes contributions on special teams. Larry Roundtree and Mark Webb are essentially practice squad players at this point, right? And then you kind of look at, you know, the 2022 draft as well. Again, I'm not calling anyone a bust, and it's certainly too early to, like, give a full grade for this class. But Xander Horvath, Dean Leonard, and Ja Taylor, like, Ja Taylor will have a bit of an expanded role this year. But, again, you're not finding true depth in the later parts of the draft. They did hit on Jamari Salyer, which will be huge going forward, which is one of the few day 3 picks that they've truly, like, nailed in recent years. Otito Ogbonya unfortunately got injured. We'll see, you know, how soon he's back this year. And Isaiah Spiller barely played last year. That is in contrast at the running back position with the Chiefs, who found Isaiah Pacheco and, you know, won a Super Bowl with him having big games down the stretch and in the playoffs. You know, so I don't say that as a diss to Spiller, but it's just, if you're going to make a day 3 pick and invest it in a running back, or if you're going to invest it in a non-premium position, if you're going to invest it really in any position at all, you got to get some guys who are going to start. And the Chiefs, obviously, in day 2 and day 3 of the 2021 draft, as you see here, found Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, who are going to be, you know, long-term starters for them on the offensive line, you know, for years to come, I would presume. So, you know, again, it's about finding value in the draft, and I think you just look at what the Chiefs' process has been versus what the Chargers' process has been, and I think the Chargers do very good when it comes to the top of the draft, but, you know, if you can go back to their 2020 and 2019 draft classes as well, you kind of find the same thing, where they're nailing a lot of their first-round picks. Didn't do it in 2019 with Jerry Tillery, but aside from that, they generally do a good job at the top of the draft. They take some flyers that don't necessarily work out towards the bottom of the draft. Again, this is what all teams do, but if you're going to build a team now around a Herbert that's going to be making a lot of money, you have to win within the margins. Otherwise, your team is just not going to have the requisite depth to win a Super Bowl. And I bring out these two guys in terms of Howie Roseman and Brett Veach, who I talked about in that video. The Chargers can kind of learn some things from Tom Telesco himself, you know, how he sort of built this, you know, Eagles, you know, I guess rebuild around Jalen Hurts, around the idea of trading back and getting capital, and then, you know, getting a lot of picks, trading them, wheeling and dealing. Telesco doesn't do a lot of that in the draft, right, as we know. But the trades that Howie Roseman made in back-to-back years in the draft allowed him to go get A.J. Brown, allowed him to go get Jordan Davis, allowed him to go get Devontae Smith, right? And sort of, you know, retool the Eagles for the next, you know, 3 or 4 years here, you know, even with paying Jalen Hurts by next season. And then, as I said, with Brett Veach, it's kind of the same thing, right? You have a quarterback in Patrick Mahomes who's already making that max money. You know, you got to do some creative things around the cap, around him in terms of what Mahomes' cap structure ended up being. And you really have to find those guys in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds of the draft who, you know, and hit on them, right? And that just, neither of these things in terms of trading back for draft capital and, you know, slamming those like day 3 hits, it just hasn't been Telesco's thing, right? With a few exceptions like Jamari Salyer. And so again, that brings us to, how do you build around Justin Herbert when you know he is going to be a $50+ million a year player? And I think the answer is the Chargers are still going to be contenders, right? They have Justin Herbert. It's about what level of contender are they? And I know Steven and Tyler did the podcast where they ranked, you know, the AFC contenders, but until the Chargers, you know, prove that they have the requisite depth to get through the season, right? injuries are one thing. Of course, you can spend a lot of money, but if all the guys get hurt, well, you're kind of fucked. But, at the same time, part of that is, again, the depth problem that the Chargers have created, but part of it is just they haven't been a super smart within the margins team and finding those wins, whether it's in, the later rounds of the draft or, just, a trade right there. They've always been kind of about the big sexy move in Tom Telesco's tenure, I would say particularly recently with the contracts that they've given out. And again, the Chargers just aren't going to have the ability to do that anymore when it comes to, Herbert in this process where he will get this contract, right? Unless, there is some finagling and they do some type of 10-year deal. But I will say that Herbert's agents here probably aren't going to want him to sign like a 10-year, 12-year deal like Patrick Mahomes did, right? It is better for a quarterback, just saying from Herbert's standpoint, to sign a 4 or 5 year deal and then, renegotiate his third contract, right? Like that is just the position to be in. That's the position that currently Dak Prescott's in. That's the, position Jalen Hurts will be in at 28 or so, once his deal is up with the Eagles, right? So clearly they've constructed their deals this way to then lead themselves into that third contract, which, I think that is the direction that we're heading with Justin Herbert as opposed to the big 10 or 12-year deal that Patrick Mahomes signed. So that'll be on Tom Telesco or whoever is the GM 2, 3, 4 years from now to kind of build this team around Herbert and around a supermax quarterback this way, where you're just doing smarter things within the margins to kind of win. And that's ultimately how the Chargers kind of win the Super Bowl, with Justin Herbert either A, making a little bit of money like he is now, or making a lot of money while, which is something he will be doing soon, right? So in either scenario, whether it's the rookie contract window or, this max quarterback window, I do think the Chargers have to kind of look internally at the way that they sort of build the team around Herbert, and think about things that they could be doing differently than they are now. But that's it for this episode of Bold Breakdowns. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments down below, when do you think we'll hear about the Justin Herbert contract, and what do you think the numbers will end up being for that Justin Herbert contract in terms of the total money and the guarantees? That's it for this one. See you guys next week, and bolt up!